Executive Director of REN21 for her opening remarks. Rana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. And thanks a lot, Matthew. I think I can, from REN21 side, I'm going to echo much of what you said. Hello, everybody. Very delighted to be with you. I'm just going to share a few slides so that because I think sometimes it's, from REN21 side, we work very much on data and figures because we clearly believe that this is something which helps illustrate the magnitude of developments, but also the challenges ahead, I guess. I think maybe to underline, we are very happy to have this joint workshop. We have a long collaboration with UNESCAP on renewable energy development in the region with a regional report basically on the status of renewable energy. And this brings me also directly to who we are from REN21 side. And I think this is also where we have a clear complement. So REN21 is a policy network. We're the only global community of renewable energy players that brings together governments, industry, research and academia, and NGOs. And I think this is something which is fundamental in our DNA, I guess, as a network of networks, as a community of more than 3,000 community members, but is also heavily anchored in our approaches. And I think the discussion we're having today on how to basically drive the transition quickly, but also in a way that is supported by society is fundamental. With those players, we're really building like an octopus on decentralized intelligence to provide basically information, insight, intelligence to decision makers. This is one part, but as you'll see on the next slide, not only this knowledge to inform, but also to really create those spaces for dialogue and debate. Obviously, and I think we all need to acknowledge that having a great study in a bookshelf, like mine behind me, is not enough if you don't communicate what basically these things mean. And we increasingly see that it's not only communication to the expert world, but that the transitions ahead really need to reach the broader society. That's also why we are really excited about this joint workshop and the PAC program in itself. You'll learn more about this later, because we feel that not only renewable energy and renewable energy technologies need to basically move into the more societal discussion, but also the whole infrastructure development around it. Now, I spoke about the magnitude. I think here and I will not go into detail, but just to show that, and I think it's interesting to look at 2009 and 2019 in particular, the energy demand in 10 years has increased a lot. The share of renewable energy has increased somewhat. The share of fossil fuel has been stable. The share of renewables has increased somewhat, but this is reflective of massive developments, in particular of solar photovoltaics and so solar PV and wind. But we see that we consume more fossil fuel than ever. And I think this is basically where we are late in terms of SDGs, in terms of carbon development, but we also see a clear acceleration today after COVID, where there were strong interruptions of supply chain. This is one part. And given the current global energy crisis and the topic of energy security. So we see that there are other development that can represent an opportunity really for an accelerated development of reliable, resilient, and fossil fuel price independent energy infrastructure. What is interesting when we look at 2020 is that basically the share of renewables went up. This is linked to COVID, but it clearly highlights how important this interplay between energy saving, efficiency, and renewable energy is. And again, grids and grid planning are obviously also at the heart of this. What we clearly see, and I think that's something to underline, these transitions mean changing the norms. And the fossil fuel norm is established since many years, not only in the energy market, but also in the economic space and also in society. And this clearly means that today, if we transition to a more efficient and renewable-based system, which is necessary for many reasons, it is important to not only create the political acceptance or social political acceptance, but also the market acceptance from all energy players, but also energy consumers, the finance sector to insurances, etc. And most importantly, also community acceptance. There are so many countries where there's a pushback against renewable energy, the NIMBY, we know about this, and it's important. And I think the keys of some countries that have lots of experiences here or longer historic experiences with renewables and grid development show that there are strategies to ensure community acceptance. The reality is that we are speaking about. Normally, we speak about the renewable energy generation part when we look at the societal acceptance, but the reality really is that the grids are at the heart of this new system we are building up. And here we're speaking about massive infrastructure to be developed, and it's really important to engage in the dialogue and debates with civil society also on this topic. To be able to make the transition happen. I think we need to acknowledge, and this is clearly what REN21 normally tries to do, that often those discussions, grid planning is highly technical, infrastructure development, there are scenarios that happen, I guess, like in expert silos. Like we'll have expert discussion on renewable energy, we'll have expert discussion on efficiency, etc. What is really important is that we democratize to some extent those discussions and ensure that civil society can be involved in those processes. And this will certainly pay off in the future. So we're basically part of this PAC consortium, the Paris Agreement compatible scenarios of energy infrastructure, together with the Renewables Grid Initiative, EEB, and CAN Europe. So it is more European focused to some extent, or historically more European focused, but we clearly see that there is a massive interest in basically connecting also the different regional experiences and developments, grid developments, civil society involvement happening globally to really put grids at the heart of our energy transition discussion and into societal discussion. So I look forward to the discussions. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay for the whole time, but yeah, wish you fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rana, for giving us such a great overview to start with. And with that, I'll just jump right into the presentations and start by handing the floor to Andre Keglash, Program Manager at Renewable Grids Initiative. Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and also thank you very much for inviting me to present some input. Just to be sure about the technical aspects, can you see the presentation?
See and hear you perfectly.
Perfect. So thank you very much. My name is Andrzej Ceglarz, and I work at Renewables Grid Initiative, which is a representative of civil society, and I'm going to give you an overview about the involvement of civil society in the grid planning based on the PAC project, on the Paris Agreement compatible scenarios project that Rana just mentioned about. Just to give you also an overview, very short one, what RGI is. So Renewables Grid Initiative is an association that brings together transmission system operators that own and operate a high voltage electricity grid in different European countries, as well as environmental and climate NGOs. Within this association, with this unique collaboration, the main objective is to build a consensus or cooperation between industry and civil society actors in order to enable the grid development that takes into account also different sustainability aspects, since as Rana mentioned, in order to build the grid and integrate renewables, we need a broader societal dimension. And within activities of RGI, we cover mostly western and southern part of Europe. So with our activities, we are concentrated, we focus mostly on Europe, but we are happy also to share some of our experiences and knowledge with other parts of the world, but also to learn how the situation looks on different continents. I'm going to discuss and to show how we try to involve as a civil society actors in grid planning matters through the PAC project. So the Paris Agreement compatible scenarios was initiated as a civil society reaction to the momentum done by the signing of the Paris Agreement, since while the target of 1.5 was agreed, but there was no movement seen how really to deliver this target. And one of the reasons was related to energy infrastructure, including grids, which are enable of such transformation. Why also actually civil society, the NGO representatives, why they were interested in this in the grid planning process and then energy infrastructure planning process, it is because the decisions made today will actually influence and determine how the energy and electricity system will look in the future. Just to give you an examples, when it comes to electricity grids, the average operational and maintenance lifespan is up to 40 years. When it comes to the gas infrastructure, which can bring additional lock-ins, building and investing in additional infrastructure can lead even to the investments that would stay for 80 years. So civil society had a specific interest to understand how this planning process looks like. When it comes to specific objectives of the PAC project, so the first PAC project was finalized with publishing of the PAC European energy scenario that is built together by CAN Europe and EEB, two of the 4 partners in this PAC project, which scenario was built in a bottom up and trying to see what are the potential pathways to achieve very ambitious reduction targets. And based on this scientific exercise of building the PAC scenario, most of the measures related to huge savings, but also development of renewables leading to electrification. So also what following up what Rana mentioned in her introductory remarks. This scenario was published in June 2020. Since last year, together with our partners, we are running the second phase of the project, in which we're trying to integrate different political, environmental, societal, and technical conditions how to implement the PAC scenario, and that leads to further improvement and update of the PAC scenario itself, but also to other activities integrating other stakeholders that would allow to identify the infrastructural and spatial requirements to proceed with that. So how this is done, what are the means and goals being realized within the PAC project? It's to inform and improve the knowledge among civil society actors, but also integrate other stakeholders representing academia or industry. We try to get engaged in expert the discussions within our activities. Then the results and the content and the knowledge produced within this capacity building or expert discussions, we try to share them with policymakers, and then also share those experiences and best practices with international community, which also is taking place actually today. But what does it mean in practice? So what exactly do we do? So within building the PAC scenario, it was more than 16 workshops involving 900 participants to build the scenario itself. Currently, the scenario is being updated according to the relevant and available data by our partners from CAN Europe. We organize modelers exchange workshops to allow the experts that are doing modeling and scenario building to discuss specific technical problems when it comes to modeling, or to foresee how what kind of assumptions should be integrated into the modeling. We organize, and this is done mostly by our partners from REN21 to share these experiences through global outreach workshops. By reaching out to policymakers, we produce and write some policy briefs that are being distributed among the policymakers at the European level, but also we contribute directly into the European grid planning. And now I'm going to present two slides that will refer directly to the European grid planning. They will be quite complicated, but I will not go very into details, but just to give you an overview. This is a nice figure done by our partners from CAN Europe, showing how the European grid planning is structured. There are many acronyms in this picture. The most important for you is to know that this European grid planning is being regulated throughout the entire Europe by the Trans-European Networks for Energy Regulation that was updated this year. The main actors being involved in this process is an agency for the cooperation of energy regulators that actually brings together national regulatory authorities from the European countries, by two organizations, European networks of transmission system operators for electricity and for gas, that are being responsible for the scenario building, which is called 10-year network development plan, that tries to identify the infrastructural needs for the upcoming decade. And these reports, based on the modeling, are being updated every 2 years. That's another figure showing how the process looks, how the current process looks like for the 2024 TYNDP process. It's also very complicated. It's just to give you some of the overview. And the point here is that already within the partners from the PAC consortium, we were able to deliver our input to the one of the documents of the responsibility of ACER, of the Agency of Energy Regulators. This happened already twice this year. And also once one of the documents, once this document, the scenario guidelines will be published, and afterwards based on these guidelines, scenarios will be built by those association for electricity and gas transmission networks. It will be another opportunity to submit and to share the input that we will create and discuss within the PAC project. So what is most important to share with you is that the European grid planning process is actually designed by this 10E regulation regulation in a way that allows civil society actors to actively participate. And within the PAC projects, the different NGOs were enabled to be activated, also to increase their capacities and understanding what kind of input can be provided to the actors responsible for the process of grid planning. And the PAC scenario itself, as an output of a scientific exercise, it is a valuable tool that allows for the involvement of civil society actors, but also currently, of course, it requires to be a subject for relevant updates concerning the changing external environment, be it for the geopolitical turmoils or scarcity of other resources and disrupted supply chains, what Rana actually also mentioned about. So this is it from our side. I also invite you to visit our PAC project website, and I'm happy for further discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will move right on to the next presentation because we have a tight schedule. I want to remind all speakers to keep to their 10 minutes, so we also have time for some discussion in the end. But without further ado, I want to give the floor to Sashiro Kimura from Renewable Energy Institute Japan for his presentation. I am just finding your slides and I will be right there. Is this the one? This is not the one, sorry. Stop sharing. Sorry for this, everyone. I don't have it open. Do I? It's because I'm not showing all windows. Sorry, everyone. 2 seconds. Now I'm the one. Here we go. It is up now.
Yep. Thank you, Randy. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Seiichiro Kimura, a researcher at the Renewable Energy Institute of Japan. Today, as a member of civil society, I would like to introduce our activities in terms of energy and grid planning. First of all, I'd like to talk about our institute's past activities related to energy and grid planning. After the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011 and the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident, we, Renewable Energy Institute, began working to build our society based on renewables. At the time, our founder, Masayoshi Son, proposed the ACR supergrid concept. Specific research on the ACR supergrid was initiated in 2016 on the ACR International Grid Study Group in our institute. In the study, we investigated the preceding studies, defined benefits and analyzed them, estimated construction cost, and proposed business model of our return on investment, and then published our report. We were also able to introduce the process of grid reinforcement and cost-benefit analysis to the Japanese public, as well as the process of grid planning in Europe. Thereafter, starting in 2020, we conducted a study to achieve carbon neutrality with 100 renewables in Japan by 2050. The study examined whether decarbonization in 2050 is possible with 100 renewables. We also evaluated the case with and without electricity imports and so on. The research showed that if a large amount of renewables, mainly offshore wind and solar PV, is introduced and flexible demand is maximized, almost 100% of energy supply could be possible in 2050 at the same level as the current energy cost. Meanwhile, the Japanese government has begun to study energy policies to become carbon neutrality since 2020. As a part of this effort, the government has also begun to take the lead in discussing the expansion of power transmission line to introduce large amounts of renewables. In Japan, the OCCTO, a government-approved organization of which all electric power companies are members, initiated a plan to enhance transmission line at the request of the government. We therefore initiated a study to examine the condition under which the government scenarios were considered, set up similar scenarios, and evaluate them. We then set up our original 100% renewables scenario for 2050, and we are now analyzing the grid plan for the scenario as well. This figure shows the power source mix in the electrical power sector as described in the 6th strategic energy plan, which was decided last year by the government. It is currently assumed that 36 to 38% of Japan's electricity supply will come from renewables in 2030, followed by a 50 to 60% share by 2050. However, the power source mix as of 2050 is not a decision, but only a rough image, and does not mean that the renewable energy ratio should not be a maximum of 20% or higher. This is a conceptual diagram of the master plan for transmission line reinforcement and the size of the transmission line needed to transfer power from the area with high offshore wind power generation potential, represented by the purple circles, to the orange demand center is being discussed. Starting on the next slide, I will compare OCTO's grid planning research with our own calculation based on OCTO's scenarios. I will present our original results too. This is a busy slide. This is figures by OCTO, the OCTO reinforcement plan in the Eastern Japanese 50 Hz area under the OCTO base scenario. OCTO has three scenarios, and this is a base scenarios result. The result of the cost benefit analysis and the amount of output curtailment are also shown in the bottom figures. And the government's renewable energy deployment target, 206 gigawatts solar PV and 86 gigawatts wind in 2050. The benefits are defined as a social welfare, gradually decrease as the interconnection line between Hokkaido and Tokyo is strengthened. On the other hand, the benefits of reduced output curtailment are also found to saturate at 6 to 8 gigawatts. Without grid reinforcement, 43% of Japan's total electricity supply could be provided by renewables. On the other hand, when grid reinforcement is implemented, the number becomes up to 47%. This analysis also assumes reinforcement in the Western Japan area, as well as between Hokkaido and Tokyo. In response to the results of the OCTO analysis, we have also performed simulation analysis with the OCTO calculation conditions. In our case, we adopt a one-by-one approach in order to look at the effect of individual transmission lines. Here, we look at the effect of transmission line reinforcement between Hokkaido and Tokyo, as shown in the figure on the left. The right figure shows the results for benefits. If fuel prices are maintained at this current level, we obtain the benefits are equal to cost at the time of 8 gigawatts expansion, similar to the result by OCTO. This figure shows the amount of output curtailment of solar PV and offshore wind. The results showed to saturate at expansions about 8 gigawatts. This trend is same as OCT result. Looking at Japan's overall electricity supply, this is also similar to the OCT results. The increase in renewables from the 8 gigawatts of grid reinforcement between Hokkaido and Tokyo was 2% of total electricity supply. This is the last slide. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we conducted a study from 2020 to 2021 to achieve 100% renewable energy supply in 2050. Therefore, we studied grid planning under that scenario, 2050, 100% scenario. In this scenario, in addition to the 12 gigawatts of transmission line reinforcement between Hokkaido and Tokyo, there will be 12 gigawatts of transmission line introduction between South Korea and Japan, and 8 gigawatt reinforcement in the Western Japan area. With this reinforcement and with roughly twice as much solar and wind power as in the government scenario, approximately 90% of the electricity supply could be provided from domestic renewables. The remaining 10% will be supplied by hydrogen fire power plant and imports from South Korea. Electricity will also be exported from Japan to South Korea. Our analysis showed that government's target is not the limit, and if appropriate grid expansion, including international transmission lines, is conducted, the supply of electricity from renewables can be brought as close to 100% as possible. This is that's all from my side. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Kimura-san, for both being extremely concise and extremely informative. I really appreciate it. With that, I will turn to Kun Chan-sun, Head of Sustainability of Regulatory Affairs from Sun Cable. Kun, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Randy.
Your microphone is ever so slightly low. Maybe you can.
Okay. Hi. Yeah. Thanks, Randy. Hi. Thanks, everyone. So just let me share screen. Okay. So.
See it now.
Okay, great. So let me turn to full screen. Okay. So good afternoon to everyone. I would like to thank the UNESCAP and REN21 for this opportunity to share about the Asia Green Grid Network today. So I'll first start off by providing a background of grid interconnectivity in Asia, which then provides the context for establishing the Asia Green Grid Network. So Sun Cable sees an immense opportunity for grid interconnectivity in Asia. So there is a significant challenge with electricity supply in Asia Pacific, having to meet the rapidly increasing electricity demand. So this is because Asia Pacific gets 71% of its electricity from fossil fuels today, and electricity demand in Asia Pacific will increase by more than 70% in 2040 and more than double by 2050. So Asia Pacific also needs to rapidly decarbonize its electricity supply while meeting its growing energy demands. Thankfully, the evolution in HVDC technology makes it more feasible to connect grids over much longer distances to link up energy abundant areas to resource constrained ones. So for example, we see voltage improvements increasing by 10% per year over the past 20 years. There's also been reliability improvements with fault rates decreasing by 80% over the past 20 years, and operational improvements with cable laying depths increasing to more than 3,000 meters. We recognize that regional grid integration can also provide a host of benefits, ranging from economic and financial, technical and operational, environmental, social, and security standpoints by optimizing the energy mix and use of renewable energy resources to enhance regional access to renewables. To date, we are aware that there are efforts globally to boost grid interconnectivity, and these include in the US, Canada, Europe, and Asia. However, comparing between Europe and Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific lags significantly in cross-border connectivity, averaging only 0.3% in Asia as compared to 12% in Europe, with the exception of some countries like the Laos and Bhutan in exporting significant amounts of hydropower. So we did a thought experiment and we estimated that the potential benefits to Asia Pacific, if by 2040 we could match Europe's 2030 target for cross-border electricity trade of 15%, we would see cross-border electricity trade in Asia Pacific in 2040 reaching more than 3,000 terawatt hours. And this translates to about US $500 billion in revenue generated. There will also be immense carbon emission savings through the increased use of renewables, abating up to 8.3% of global emissions based on 2020 levels. We also see more than 800,000 jobs being created in Asia Pacific as a result of cross-border interconnection projects based on the total projected investment linked to cross-border electricity trade in 2040. So recognizing these opportunities, Sun Cable thus established the Asia Green Grid Network together with 9 corporate and research partners from across Australia and Singapore. The Asia Green Grid Network, or the AGGN, aims to help drive innovation to support a connected grid in Asia to generate opportunities in renewables and storage. The objectives are threefold, namely to encourage collaboration, education, and innovation. So collaboration is by bringing together research institutions and industry, as well as businesses, to share research and ideas on key topics associated with green grids. And this includes microgrids, battery backup, energy storage, and so on. And we look towards providing opportunities for educating a wide range of stakeholders by providing lectures on key areas of promoting green grid and grid interconnectivity for the purpose of promoting thought leadership among senior level policymakers, as well as capability building in the region. For example, in the latest developments in HVDC transmission, best practice policies and approaches, and so on. And lastly, on innovation, which looks at working together with partners on R&D projects to catalyze grid interconnection. So we plan to expand the network to include institutions from Indonesia, Southeast Asia, as well as eventually other parts of Asia. As founding partners, organizations will have the option to contribute their expertise and host discussions to promote growing the ecosystem in the clean energy and grid interconnectivity space. For our founding partners, the benefits would also include facilitating greater exposure to industry thought leadership. We'll also be engaging in a range of R&D activities with our partners, which would allow the AGGN to serve as a commercialization platform for R&D activities. Lastly, we also plan to explore procurement opportunities related to the AGGN, such as in areas relating to high-density battery energy storage for Australia-Asia Powerlink project. Thank you for this opportunity to share about the AGGN, and please feel free to reach out to myself or anyone in Sun Cable if you wish to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kun. That was really informative, and I can only encourage people to reach out in terms of joining the network if it's of interest. Finally, the last presentation, we have Yahun Kim from Solutions for Our Climate. I will just share her slides and then we should be there. Go. The floor is yours.
So thank you, REN21 and UN ESCAP for convening such a pertinent and meaningful workshop. My name is Chahyun Kim. I'm a research associate from our power market and grid program from Solutions for Our Climate. Today, I'll be speaking about the challenges of integrating renewables into the power grid in Korea. So before we jump into the details, I'd like to introduce who we are. Solutions for Our Climate, also known as SFOC, is an independent research and advocacy organization currently based in Seoul, South Korea, founded around 6 years ago. So we focus on the decarbonization of the power sector, the industry sector, and catalyzing the fossil fuel projects divestment by tapping into the climate finance. So since we have a very limited time here, I have a quick overview of my today's presentation. It'll be divided into 3 parts. First, how is renewable energy doing in Korea, to give you a quick context of what we're standing at. And second part will be to address the challenges that we're faced with, what should be tackled to accommodate more renewables into the grid. And last but not the least, I'd like to highlight the role of civil society when it comes to the grid planning and market reform by introducing some of our key strategies. So the renewable energy penetration in Korea, as you can see on the graph on the left side, Korea has the lowest renewable energy share for solar and wind among all the OECD member countries, which was 4.7% as of last year. And in the meantime, the new administration has very recently cut down its RE target from 30% by 2030 down to 19.5% for solar and wind. And the rationale behind this decision was that the previous target, 30%, was too unrealistic and too far-fetched. So that's what we're dealing with at this moment. So then why are renewables struggling in Korean grid? To answer this ultimate question, we need to understand how a vertically integrated power market structure could affect the grid operation so that it works against renewables. This graph here is the Korean power market in a nutshell. Just like, as you can see, just like any other vertically integrated market, we have a single state-owned utility, SOU, called KEPCO, owning all the transmission and distribution grids, and while being the one and only retailer in the market, and also financially connected with its generation subsidiaries that produce most of the Korea's electricity, heavily reliant on coal, gas, and oil. Just as many of you would know, this SOU's dominance here can also easily affect how the grid operates, for example, by wielding its power to the key decision-making processes between the generation side and the grid side. For example, we were able to dissect all the decision-making process within the KPX, as you can see here in the blue box. It's our system/market operator. And it turns out that our SOU is heavily influencing, not only taking the majority of the key committees that could decide the grid operation roles and pricing schemes, but also by being the only member delegate on the KPX's board table, along with its subsidiaries, without any representation whatsoever for other renewable energy generators. So basically, such an inevitable risk of conflict of interest within the system makes the system operator more difficult to decide anything that goes against the favor of the SOU. In this case, choosing renewables over its long-standing fossil fuel assets. Before moving on, I'd like to highlight that this problem is not just for Korea. This could happen anywhere else and is currently happening in other regions that has a power market structure that is mostly led by its state-owned utility that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. For example, like in Japan, there's TEPCO, and in Vietnam, there's EVN and PLN in Indonesia, for example. So here we have a very great case study of Jeju Island in Korea that showcases how this kind of conflict of interest could affect the grid planning and operation. In Jeju Island, as you can see on the left side graph, It has solar and wind takes up, which is 18%, which is way higher than the mainland grid in general. However, many of the renewables are getting increasingly and severely curtailed, and the rate is expected to go up until 19% by 2034 by our recent modeling results. We need to look into the root cause of this increasing renewable curtailment. So I'm not going into much details here, but long story short, there is a unfair competition going on Jeju Island between a big scale, all state-owned oil and gas generators and much smaller, mostly privately owned renewables. And as an example for the grid operation, these big scale fossil fuel generators, its capacities are considered on a priority by being designated as so-called must-run generators to maintain the grid stability, hence renewables getting curtailed instead. So this is one example of the unfairness within the grid operation. And as another clear piece of evidence that displays the unfairness on the grid, our recent modeling research comes in. So according to our modeling result and our cost-benefit analysis, it turns out that if we get to operate a more flexible grid with more renewables, the operation rate of the state-owned fossil fuel generators goes down. So this gap in between, it clearly shows that the current system cannot provide any economic motive for the state-owned utility to choose flexibility resources and renewables over their own fossil fuel assets. So that was the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome in due course. Then what would be an ideal picture of the quote-unquote renewable friendly power grid in Korea? We have two key policy recommendations. First and foremost, it is imperative to ensure complete independence and transparency throughout the entire decision-making process within the power market governance. And second, and this would be a precursor to the first point, we need to disconnect the financial linkage between the grid and the generation assets. Moving on to the next slide right away. And then what would be the role of civil society like SFOC when it comes to planning renewable energy friendly power grid and markets? So here I have brought 4 key points, key roles that can be played by civil society. It's first communications, research, community building, and stakeholder engagement that are all intertwined with each other. So if I get to sum up all these 4 points into one sentence, I personally believe that a role of civil society when it comes to grid planning, it is our role to point out that the elephant is definitely here in the room when no one wants to speak up about that, or sometimes if it gets too obvious that we are seeing the elephant in this room. So that would be the role of civil society. And our team and SFOC are currently developing our own strategies based on these 4 pillars. First, for the communication, here, let's see, for the comms, we do our best not to fall into the so-called trap of the insider only discussion, or sometimes we can call it like engineers only, experts only discussion. So we always try to speak in our own language, which is more public friendly, so that we can effectively communicate with key policymakers and stakeholders who are not that familiar with all the technical jargon and technical concepts, so that we can support them to comprehend what's actually going on in the grid. And as I said, I'd like to highlight that we build our comms narrative based on a solid and concrete evidence discovered by various research projects. It could be modeling or cost-benefit analysis and so on. So, but I think I have covered most of our key findings from our flagship research. So moving on right away to the next point. So for the community building, as I said earlier, the problem that Korea is faced with is not just for Korea, and it resonates within the region. So we believe it's critical to bring this problem up to the regional and sub-regional level. So that is why SFOC chose to go beyond Korea and accelerate our efforts to establish regionalized fora, just like our workshop today, so that we can share with each other about what others are dealing with and to learn from each other. And for the next part, for engaging with various key stakeholders and expanding our network, we choose to work on the so-called carrot and stick approach. And what I mean by carrot here, it could be a more positive interaction to encourage or sometimes persuade the key stakeholders by inducing so-called confidence in them. For example, by working on like joint seminars and giving them policy consultation and having close workshops with other system operators in other countries so that they can actually make change. And also for the sticks, I mean, it could be some strategic move, or if not negative. We try to tap into, for example, the National Assembly audit or some media campaigns so that we may deliver some stronger message towards key players so that they can break out from the status quo and to take them one step further when it comes to improving the grid stability and the power market reform. And last but not least, we also do some diplomatic engagements, which was one of the most successful strategies that we have chose. It became very effective when it comes to mobilizing like key stakeholders at a more high-level discussions. So this was everything for today's presentation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that concludes our presentation round of this, this joint workshop. And I would now like to hand over the floor to Anna Lubanova from UNESCAP for our panel discussion. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Randy. Welcome, everyone. And I believe today's speaker set the excellent scene for the discussion. And without further ado, let me introduce the panelists today. And before I do so, I just kindly remind all the participants in the room and also online to think about the questions to the speakers and to the panelists today. So today with us, I'm very much honored to introduce Mohammed Hussain, Director General PowerCell Bangladesh, Mr. Benny Sriyadi, Manager of Power, Fossil Fuel, Alternative Energy and Storage from ASEAN Center of Energy, Mr. Andrei Seglash, Program Manager, Social Energy Systems from Renewables Grid Initiative, and Ms. Mika Obayashi, Director of Renewable Energy Institute. Welcome, everyone. And my first question goes to all participants. We've heard different ways and different opinions of engaging civil society to grid planning today. And my first question is very simple to all the panelists. Could you think about one benefit and one barrier on engaging civil society from your point of view? Because you are from different backgrounds and represent different organizations. So please, from your experience, what's one key benefit and one key barrier of engaging civil society in grid planning? Any volunteers to start? Mika-san?
Okay, I will start. Thank you very much for the REN21 and the Renewable Grid Initiative, and of course the UNESCAP to provide this really meaningful workshop. And then I would like to point out two things related to answering the question. One, the declining prices of renewables and the deployment of renewables over the last 2 decades have brought new players into the energy sector, questioning the prevailing view that private operation is the best which has been prominent in the privatization and the liberalization process so far. In practice too, the operation of transmission networks by private operators is not necessarily more efficient than public operations. Second, the diversification of energy policy options towards the new goals of sustainability and climate crisis response. In other words, the energy transition has made energy supply not just a technical and economic issue, but a means to realize more diverse objectives. In this context, diverse actors' involvement in grid planning is crucial. This is because the grid is not simply a grid to be prepared for large centralized power plants, but a grid to supply diverse, decentralized renewable energies. The same applies to the supply side, which requires citizens' involvement in energy planning, including grid planning. And on the second question, like where barriers exist, it is difficult to identify each stakeholder reliably. For example, Japan has a legal separation of power generation and grid sector, but no ownership unbundling. As a result, except for TEPCO and the Tube Electric, other utilities, combined power and the retail sector go together as a company, and the TSO exists as a subsidiary under the combined company. This makes it unclear whether the independence of the transmission company itself is ensured. Japan is currently in the process of introducing a revenue cap system for the transmission sector. This is an attempt to introduce some cost-cutting efforts in the transmission business based on the assumption that transmission sector costs will increase in the future. In introducing such a new system, the question remains as to who will be able to scrutinize the cost professionally and technically, and how citizens can be involved in the process. Usually, the issue is discussed in the Electricity and Gas Market Surveillance Committee's expert committee, inviting some consumers' representatives. This time, the Consumer Affairs Agency wanted to commit the process directly, and actually I myself was asked to conduct a joint scrutiny and provided advice. Under this experience, I strongly felt it is difficult for ordinary consumers to conduct professional scrutiny that in this process. So it's difficult to how to identify the stakeholders. That's my two answers.
Thank you so much for raising such an important question, such an important issues. And I see the hand from Andre. Do you want to jump in with your answers?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I would like to echo a bit one of the points mentioned, that actually when we think about the benefits and the barriers, they're partially interconnected. So definitely involving civil society actors into the grid and energy planning process brings this additional value of opening different perspectives that these actors bring with. And while the grid planning is a very technical activity, very often done with engineers with a specific objective to guarantee and ensure stable electricity supply, clearly building of electricity grid interferes also with the environment and social manners, which often or in the past has been neglected. So bringing these actors representing civil society can bring those perspectives. At the same time, one of the main barriers is still related to the capacities of the NGOs, in a way, to what extent they are capable in contributing to the grid planning process, whether it's planning in terms of the scenarios, which is also stemming from the presentation that I had, a very technical and complex matter to understand and to cover all of these aspects and variables and factors that come in, at the same time following the political process that is accompanying, at least from the European perspective, and the regulatory process that is accompanying the grid development also requires the increase of internal capacities of these of civil society actors. But last point, actually something what can be a barrier, but also can be a kind of opportunity. I think what is also important at the stage already about the planning of specific lines when it comes to the making decisions already about the corridors, not only about investigating the need for additional power lines, is the development of specific tools and the specific processes that would allow the integration of local knowledge that civil society actors can deliver. That requires additional resources, be it for building these tools that would be based on some GIS systems or providing some sensitivity mapping, but still this can highly contribute to the integration of the knowledge that civil society actors can bring with. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrei, for raising these important points of the knowledge integration, and knowledge sharing, as we've heard today, is one of the very important aspects. Mr. Hussein, do you want to add something from country perspective?
Thank you, Anna, for inviting me to this very interesting session. At least I have come across few initiatives which I had before, right? REN21, PAC, RGI, REI, SFOC, and Asian Supergrid. Anyway, from the presenters, in fact, point, I have cut two issues. One is community acceptance for RE. This is very important, particularly in Bangladesh. When we see that the community is having electricity through mini grid, but when they see that their neighbors are having grid, then they are no more interested to be with that individual they were pursuing for having access to the grid power. The second issue is the renewable friendly power grid, which the Kim has mentioned. That is also important that you see now still there are apprehension that particularly the quality grid which is having in the developing countries, whether renewable can be accommodated in this grid or not. So as he was telling that particularly the utilities are holding on the whole power system. So they are no more, in fact, interested, still not interested to inject RE in the grid. So these two issues I thought I should interact. And then coming back to your question, whether what is the benefit of involving the civil society? It's not only the matter of benefit, rather it's you can say the obligation, the compulsion that you have to involve the community for grid planning. You know that unlike a generation plan, the grid planning is involved with distributed lands, particularly the country like Bangladesh, which is a populous country. So finding a piece of land is very difficult. Then we can seek help of these community leaders, and they can unite people to convince that, okay, this is for the greater interest of the country. Then we can execute this grid. So this is must that we have to involve the community people. But one threat is there that sometimes these community leaders take the control over the mass people. So that is also a risk that they can have a collaboration with you see the implementing agencies. Then sometimes this mass people may be deprived of their establish their rights. So I think these are the two issues I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. It's very important to hear from country perspective that that's actually the obligation to engage the civil society and the community. And moving up to intergovernmental level, Benny, do you want to add your opinion on that?
Thank you. So as we at ASEAN Center for Energy is more focusing our work on the grid planning for the cross-border interconnection. I mean, I just respond to the question that you have that talking about the great interconnection between the countries is most of the cases not as simply about the dollar that being generated. So it's not only on the economic value of the project of the selling the electricity from one country to the other countries, but it's also that how much the benefit that could be generated on the socio and economic impact. So this is where I mean, it's going to be the importance of the involvement of the civil society to be part of this discussion. In many examples that we have, is the discussion is only, I mean, is not progressing well when it's only talking about the dollars being involved. But but there is so much of the benefit beyond the direct economy that will be gained by utilities of the player to be involved that can be generated. In many cases, they are out of the equation. So that's also in many cases the project from the cross-border interconnection is not progressing well. So but if they have a place, a role to also be part of the discussion, to be part of the justification why the project is need to be progressed, and then we can see that how we can push forward with this cross-border interaction. But it's also a challenge that you mentioned, the defining who is the civil society that will be engaged. I mean, it's going to be, at the national level, I think that there are quite defined that who are the player, who are the civil society. And in many countries also, there is a rules or regulation that requesting or mandatory for them to be involving. But when the discussion in the cross border, and then we do not have that kind of regulation yet. So who are the players? This is also the most difficult for us. And then who are the partners that we need to sit down, inviting them to be part of the discussion? Who are them? It's going to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benny, for raising these issues. It's definitely very important to keep in mind that when we talk about energy development, it's not only about grids, it's what's behind that. And it's actually people and people having access to sustainable energy and electricity and so on. And I very much encourage our participants to raise their hands and to ask their questions. You can either use the raise hand button and ask the question yourself, or type it in the chat. We can see everything, your comments, questions, reactions. And while our participants are still thinking about questions, I will move to the second round of questions. And my next question goes to Andre. He mentioned in his presentation, and it was in the air during the whole discussion, the importance of knowledge sharing. And you mentioned that you already engaged a lot with civil society during your work, especially during the preparation of 10-year network development plan. Could you maybe share with us a little bit more the type of engagement you had, or maybe some other examples beyond what you already mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, Anna. So maybe I will divide my answer into two parts. The first one in regarding the 10 years network development plan, which is let's say more pan-European process of the grid planning. Maybe to share some information that is the most current, the cycle, how it is being regulated in Europe started this summer with basically building the guidelines, how the scenarios should be built. And within this process that was facilitated by the agency of European Agency of Energy Regulators, civil society actors, they had an opportunity to actively participate and to share their input, but also concerns regarding how the scenarios, how the guidelines for the scenarios buildings should be designed. From this process, the main two messages or takeaways are that this process was facilitated in a participatory way, also because it was the regulation that deals with this process allows and explicitly points out into civil society actors to be involved in this process. So this comes from a high political level that already includes civil society actors and opens the door for them to participate. Of course, our experience as RGI, and I think that other civil society actors from Europe, is that both main actors being responsible for that, so the agency of regulators, but also associations of energy transmission system operators, also in the past, they proved that they are open to the voice of civil society actors, but still within the entire energy landscapes and considering many diverse actors, and including the strong monopolists from the past, it's good that such a clear indication was on the civil society actors was included in the regulation. And second, what is important within this process to keep in mind is that if you want to provide a substantial and relevant input, but also to increase and leverage your influence, it is essential to talk with other NGOs or with other civil society actors. It is, from our experience, it was proven that while before submitting our inputs or sharing our insights, it is crucial then to discuss, exchange, and agree what kind of points we would like to include in this consultation process, what is important for us, also as a part of this knowledge sharing. So this is so to say at this European level when it comes to the European grid planning process. Other examples that I actually have in mind, let's say they stem from the activities carried out by RGI members. As I mentioned in my presentation, RGI members are distributed across many European countries. There are transmission system operators are among them, but also civil society actors that are also implementing specific projects on the ground. So it opens, so they create an environment in which civil society actors can also participate not only at the European level, but also at the national. And this relates to the grid planning, and there are great examples from Germany or France where NGOs were directly invited to provide input into national plans, but also to the planning at the local level, but also operation and maintenance, and that relates to the, let's say, physical buildup or physical planning of the electricity infrastructure, and specific measures to be implemented that would reduce the pressure on the environment or on the local communities. And here the examples could be either Belgium, that the Belgian transmission system operators, ELIA, together with NGOs, develop entire concept or methodology behind the integrated vegetation management, how to respect the nature around the electricity grid. Or another example is Ireland, when the national TSO, with the support of the national regulator, created entire scheme and a process of community funds that allow local communities and local citizens to be remunerated financially or to participate financially in the grid development. So there are many examples from Europe at the, let's say, at the European level, at the national level. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to share those specific examples through our materials. So
thank you so much, Andre. And I believe one of the crucial points you mentioned is that actually when the regulations allows civil society to participate in a grid planning, so when the mechanism of the engagement exists, and that's definitely a very important point. And with this, I would like to turn my question to Benny. And from intergovernmental perspective, how in Asia it's possible to bridge the conversation in engage civil society from different countries? Because as you operate on ASEAN level, is it possible to conduct the conversation not only inside one country, but to involve the communities from different countries?
Thank you very much. Before that, I just add in additional information that on the situation that pushing the cross-border interconnection between the countries. I mean, one case we have, for example, people in the border of the Kalimantan, Indonesia, who doesn't have access to electricity. They are not part. I mean, they are not part of the general plan of the grid planning from the central government, because it's simply the cost is too expensive to provide. That's going to be, but then the framework to allowing the communication and involve the civil society, allowing the idea to connect them to the Malaysia in order to provide the electricity. So there is a framework that being existing on the discussion between the countries that pushed by the civil society to promote this cross-border interconnection. Another example that we have, as we are many of you today, about the LTMS scenario that could be. This is also a solid example that the involvement of the civil society in pushing their countries to go towards more greener. I mean, Singapore doesn't have an option. I mean, they already explored to the maximum of having a solar rooftop, but that's a limited possibility they have. And then they're pushing the idea. I mean, civil society is very much involved in pushing the idea to having a green electricity generated from the neighboring countries. So this is where kind of, I mean, the civil society involvement is very important in this agenda. But I mean, unfortunately, there is, I mean, at ASEAN level, there is no specific framework that allowing this communication to be happen at among the countries. Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, in the many discussion that we have, I mean, we have a discussion between, for example, in Papua discussion, the head of utilities, or the discussion with the policy makers. There is a moment where we invited several civil society to be part of this discussion. To present their idea, to present their insight on all, whether they also have their own studies that justify this kind of idea, and then to be, I mean, to be mix it with what the government, the policymakers put in place. But I mean, we have, I mean, at the national level of Indonesia, we have like Masyarakat Kelistrikan, the Society for the Electricity, also a similar case that we have in a number of countries. They are bringing the table, but it's not yet in the framework that being established. So sometimes, I mean, it's really depend on how much the countries really remember them to be part of this kind of discussion. But then we already tried to initiate the idea. I mean, it's going to be to push at the ASEAN level the discussion that's going to be having like a similar type of the civil society on this energy sectors. But then again, is the player, I mean, it's going to be the civil society that also put the interest on the regional issue is also very limited. So this is a challenge. I mean, it's going to be from the government and from the government side on the regional cooperation side that we are starting to open the door on this, trying to establish it. But then it's also not an easy to find that who are the civil society in ASEAN countries that have the interest or want to be involved in talking about the regional cross-border. I mean, we have like maybe like WWF that have also a specific study on the regional interconnection in the Mekong area. It's going to be, but that's one is very limited. So the discussion is ongoing, but it's also the question that who could be or who could be invited to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benny. It's very important to hear that you're trying to engage civil society in your work. And also, I believe it bridges with what Mr. Hussein mentioned, that yes, who is the civil society and what are the actors to engage with? And there was great to hear the example from Singapore that where the civil society actually demanding for the green energy. And with this, my question goes to Mika-san. From your experience, how civil society may influence renewable energy development? Is there some examples you could think about? Or if there are any?
Yeah, in Japan, yeah. Actually, there is a process that we introduced the German type of feed-in tariff back in 2012, that we pushed the government to accept that system to foster the renewable energy deployment. That is one example that I can say. And then also at that time that so many community responded to introduce that renewables with a kind of a civil funding to have the renewable energy generation facility in Japan and then developed. And also it's not the civil society, but the non-state actors, especially the companies, big consumers requested the government to have the procurement process of renewables, that they want to become 100% renewables. And then there's no system in Japan that they can directly buy the renewables from the grid, but they requested the government, and then government think of the two ways. One is a non-fossil fuel certificate. It's a kind of a green certificate scheme that if they buy the green certificate track record, that it will be assumed that they are buying green electricity. The second thing is that they themselves become the retailer and then register to the power market, and then they can buy the electricity from the. So those kind of things that are happening in Japan. And then I just want to say that it relates to what Andrej said. The strongest way is to allow environmental groups and others to participate on the participate in the process of the energy planning is to take them on the board. This isn't easy in the current solid market operated shareholders power company process, but still some utilities have created a process for direct public input, for example, by electing directors through the candidatures from the community. So I think that it could be introduced in certain the utilities that if they allow this kind of system.
Thank you so much, Mika-san. And we are running a little bit of time, but my last question with this goes to Mr. Hussein. You mentioned that that's the obligation to engage civil society. And just last thing, could you briefly describe the mechanism, how you think?
We have to have environmental and social clearance from the Department of Environment. And for that, public disclosure is a must. So there mainly the civil society plays the main role to discuss about this pros, cons, and other issues. So that is, you can say, the legal compulsion for involving the civil society in our this grid planning. I would like to add two issues regarding the involvement of civil society in the development of renewable energy. You know that Bangladesh has got the biggest solar home system program, installed 6 million solar home system in the country. And we have achieved that by engaging the NGOs. In fact, they have motivated the people in the rural areas who have used traditional lamps, and that has been replaced by solar home system, and they have been enlightened. The second one is regarding the intergovernmental involvement, intergovernmental project. Civil society engagement is rather more important. Like you see the regarding interconnection between Bangladesh, India, I think Mr. Pankaj will bear with me. The civil society where the professionals are more positive rather than the bureaucrats and politicians. So I think that is very important in planning the grid. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very important to hear. And Andre, you have last remarks?
Yes, exactly. Just last remark, and maybe adding up what was already mentioned among the speakers. I just wanted to also put attention to another aspect. Of course, there is this regulatory part that opens the door to integrate the civil society actors into grid planning, and this is let's say this kind of formalized aspect of it. But there is another one that what is important, and this is what we know from our RGI experience, that brings together transmission system operators and NGO, civil society actors, that this is important to remember, that the regulation will not do everything by itself. It is important to, within the process, to build trust, to be open, to listen to other perspectives. And next to this kind of formal, let's say, mechanisms that is enabled by regulations, I would just add that this is also a changing mindset of people, that saying that things that are not possible actually are possible to do, because these actors have a knowledge that actually can both profit from. And this means from both, not only for the transmission system operators or grid operators or whoever is responsible for grid planning, but also for NGOs to be open and to listen to the other actors. So this is just what I wanted to add and share also from our RGI experience. Thank you.
Thank you. That's definitely very important, to the ability to listen and to comprehend the information. I saw there was one hand from the audience. Yes, just very, very quick.
Yeah, just a quick question from me. Not speaking from ESCAP's perspective, but also from a pro-poor perspective. I think we've heard about democratic participation, especially in terms of ensuring mechanisms for good governance. And these are really important lessons to learn from developed sort of countries like Japan and Germany and other European examples. The gap between these countries and the developing world is still quite wide when it comes to governance. Civil society is also not as well developed also, and public voice and the public participation, civic engagement is also fairly limited. So in that sense, I would say when we heard earlier in the earlier sessions, for the move towards a more market-based approach, I see some issues when it comes to an electrification proposal for rural areas, because the market won't invest in rural areas. There's not much of an ROI in it when it comes to grid delivery, but perhaps in terms of off-grid or other kinds of approaches, there might be some interesting learnings to be had from, say, Power Africa or other African societies. But my question is, how do you involve civil societies in a developing world, in a developing context, to create more consumer awareness and to allow them a voice in the formal energy planning process? And how do governments create that space, which is previously, it's much more technocratic in, especially in Asian societies? That's just my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's a very important question, and I believe we've just heard Benny and Mr. Hossein replying to that, and I believe you could engage with them afterwards for further discussion. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to thank all the participants today. And with this, I pass the floor to Randy for closing remarks, and to Andrea as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I will make this super short. I first of all want to thank all the participants and speakers today. I personally learned a lot from listening to you, and also the different types of voices we had around the room, from a ministry official from Bangladesh to a regional intergovernmental organizations to researchers in country. I think it was really diverse, and for me, it brought a voice and attention to my mind that I must admit I tend to forget. So from my personal perspective, I hope that this is the first of many initiatives that we can do together, because as Matt said in the opening of this is something that we do too little of and we need to do more of. And this whole conversation about figuring out who to bring to the room, I really hope that ESCAP can be a platform where we bring diverse voices into the room. So with that, I really want to make sure that ESCAP can be a voice to promote inclusion, both from civil society and actors across the power sector, both in regulatory development, but also general dialogue, because I think the spirit of the UN is together in collaboration, we're stronger. And I think today's session really showed that. So again, thank you everyone. And a special thank you to REN21 for approaching ESCAP with this idea. We're very, very grateful for that. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Randy. Well, as a closing remark, I think we're running out of time and a lot has been said. So especially many thanks to ESCAP for hosting this event today, for giving this great opportunity to bring this conversation today here. And of course, an enormous thanks to the panelists and the speakers. It was incredibly rich of insights and points of view. And well, my main takeaway is that it's possible. And so that's we heard so many examples, and including very technical aspects and very precise policy recommendations. So well, it's great to hear that it's a starting point, and this conversation can keep growing and to ultimately continue building this capacity, sharing the knowledge we need to involve different actors to ultimately accelerate renewables integration and build support. And so, well, I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And from our side, well, the PAC project, as Andre said, continues. We will continue the capacity building and also exploring country perspectives. And our next event will very likely happen during SPIREC, which is the International Renewables Energy Conference, which will happen in Madrid in February. And well, again, I also hope this is the first of a long series of conversations. And again, thank you all very, very much for having us today. Andre, you have your hand raised.
No, it was just an icon to clap and to congratulate.
Thank you.